The 19th of June, 1944. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the Philippine Sea, radar operators hunched over glowing screens, watching electronic ghosts materialize into deadly reality. Task Force 58, the mightiest armada ever assembled, stood ready. In the Fighter Direction Center, phosphorescent blips transformed into vectors, numbers, coordinates of approaching doom. A message crackled through from the submarine USS Albacore, patrolling the dark waters ahead. Enemy carriers detected. Multiple air groups launching. The attack was coming. Lieutenant Charles Sims reached for his headset, fingers steady despite what was about to unfold. 15 American carriers would scramble every fighter they possessed. Lexington, Enterprise, Yorktown. These proud ships carried names that already echoed through history. What none of them understood yet was that this single day would witness the most devastating aerial slaughter ever recorded at sea. Before the sun set, the skies would be painted with the wreckage of an entire generation of pilots. The Pacific conflict had taught American airmen a brutal truth about their enemy. Japanese carrier pilots weren't merely skilled. They were aerial samurai, warriors of the clouds, trained to perfection. Eliminate those pilots, the Americans had learned, and the mighty carriers they flew from became nothing more than floating steel coffins. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commanded the largest striking force Japan could still field. 9 carriers, steaming in formation: Taiho, Shokaku, Zueikaku, Junyo, Hiyo, Ryuho, Chitose, Chiyoda, and Zuiho. 430 aircraft poised to deliver what Tokyo hoped would be a crushing blow against the American invasion of Saipan. This was the mobile fleet, Japan's last real chance to turn the tide. The Imperial strategy depended more than just carrier aircraft. Land-based planes from Guam, Rota, and Tinian would join the assault. Combined, over 500 aircraft would darken American skies. Admiral Suemu Toyoda, commanding the entire combined fleet, had declared the stakes plainly. The fate of the Empire rests on this one battle. Every resource, every trained pilot, every hope for victory had been concentrated into this single desperate gamble. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat carved through tropical air at 380 miles per hour. Its Pratt & Whitney double wasp engine hammered out 2,000 horsepower, driving 12,000 pounds of armor and weaponry forward with relentless force. Commander David McCampbell stood before his pilots in Essex's ready room, studying the tactical display. His air group carried 104 pilots, every one trained for a single purpose: destroying Japanese aircraft. 6 Browning 50 caliber machine guns bristled from each Hellcat's wings and fuselage, 400 rounds per gun. 212 pounds of cockpit armor that would mean the difference between life and death. The Hellcat embodied American engineering philosophy: build it tough, build it deadly, and build enough of them to overwhelm any opponent. Unlike the fragile Zero, which sacrificed protection for agility, the Hellcat prioritized one thing above all else: bringing its pilot home alive. Each machine gun spat armor-piercing incendiary rounds at 850 rounds per minute. The mathematics were brutally simple. A Zero could outmaneuver a Hellcat in close combat, twisting and turning with supernatural grace. But the Hellcat needed only 2 seconds of accurate fire to reduce any Japanese aircraft to flaming debris. Lieutenant Alexander Vreeshew understood these numbers intimately. A DePauw University graduate with 8 months of combat experience, Vreeshew had studied the science of aerial killing. Air combat was about energy management. Altitude converted to speed. Speed to position. Position to advantage. Deflection angles. Target acquisition. Split-second geometry. The difference between survival and death often measured in mere fractions of a second, but always determined by superior firepower. Task Force 58 had assembled a force that staggered imagination. 15 fleet carriers, 956 aircraft total, including 475 Hellcat fighters. Vice Admiral Mitzger commanded what had become the most devastating naval striking force humanity had ever created. Against this armada, Osawa could field his 430 carrier planes plus roughly 100 land-based aircraft. The Japanese were already outnumbered nearly 2-to-1 before combat even began. Aboard Taiho, Admiral Osawa reviewed his desperate plan one last time. 430 aircraft organized in sequential waves. The mobile fleet displaced 65,000 tons of steel, powered by the finest engines Japanese industry could manufacture. Her air groups contained pilots who had trained for months in preparation. But Japan's greatest weakness had only grown more critical since Midway. The veterans who struck Pearl Harbor, who dominated the Indian Ocean, who fought in the early carrier battles were mostly gone now. Attritioned, killed, scattered. Their replacements averaged fewer than 200 flying hours compared to American pilots with over 500 hours of intensive preparation. The gap went deeper than simple flight time. American aviators received exhaustive gunnery training, extensive carrier practice, thorough instrument instruction. Japanese replacement pilots often enter combat without ever firing their weapons in training. Many had completed fewer than 10 carrier landings. Navigation instruction was minimal, relying on experienced flight leaders to guide entire formations to targets. The American ships formed concentric defensive rings, a layered fortress on water. Destroyers prowled the outer perimeter. Battleships formed the middle ring. Carriers occupied the protected center. Every vessel swept the sky with SK and SC radar systems, electronic eyes that could see what human vision could not. Fighter direction officers worked in air-conditioned combat information centers with their plotting boards tracking every contact within 150 miles. Radar operator First Class James Peterson had spent 14 months perfecting his craft across the Pacific. His hands moved with practiced precision, adjusting gain and sweep rate while watching the screen for contacts. Weather conditions were ideal for detection. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, no precipitation to create false returns. The perfect day for electronic warfare. At 1000 hours, Peterson's scope exploded with contacts. Range 150 miles, bearing 260 degrees, altitude approximately 20,000 feet. He slammed the general quarters alarm and grabbed the intercom. Bridge, radar, large raid bearing 260, range 150 miles, Angels 20. On Osawa's flagship, the attack coordinator had launched the opening wave at 0830. 69 aircraft, 16 Zero fighters, 45 dive bombers, 8 torpedo bombers. Formation time from launch to departure, 23 minutes. Time to target, estimated 90 minutes at cruising speed of 180 knots. Carefully conserved to preserve fuel for the return journey. Fighter Director Lieutenant Joseph Eggert plotted intercept geometry on his tactical board. Enemy speed 180 knots. Course roughly 080 towards the attack force. Time to intercept, approximately 35 minutes if Hellcats launched immediately. The mathematics of aerial interception demanded perfect calculations balancing vector, altitude, and fuel consumption. Admiral Mitzger's response was instantaneous. Launch all fighters. Vector 260. Climb to Angels 25. The first Hellcat roared off the deck at 10:23. Within 12 minutes, 140 F-6F fighters were climbing towards the incoming raid. Every pilot briefed on Japanese tactics and the critical importance of altitude advantage.
The Hellcats climbed at 3,000 feet per minute, their powerful engines providing the crucial edge in the race for height. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer led Essex's 1st Division, 16 fighters in 4 plane elements, climbing through 20,000 feet when radar called the contact. Tally-ho, bandits 2 o'clock high. The sky transformed into twisted contrails as Hellcats dove on the Japanese formation. Brewer's opening burst sent a Zero spinning downward in flames. His wingman destroyed a dive bomber with a deflection shot that tore off its right wing. Within 90 seconds, 8 Japanese aircraft were falling toward the Philippine Sea. The Hellcats' 50 caliber guns achieved convergence at 300 yards, where all 6 streams of bullets intersected in a concentrated kill zone. At that range, a 2-second burst delivered 170 rounds into a 6-foot circle. Japanese aircraft, built without self-sealing fuel tanks or armor protection, simply disintegrated under such concentrated fire. Lieutenant Stanley Swede Viatasa from Yorktown described the engagement with stunned disbelief. They came in perfect formation, like a peacetime parade. We hit them from above and behind. It was like shooting clay pigeons. They didn't even try to evade. By 1100 hours, the first wave had been annihilated. 42 aircraft destroyed outright, 27 damaged and forced to retreat. Only 12 Japanese aircraft penetrated to attack positions, and of those, 7 fell to anti-aircraft fire from the battleship's screen. The new proximity-fused shells, one of the war's most closely guarded secrets, detonated near aircraft automatically, creating lethal clouds of shrapnel that didn't require direct hits. At 11:07, radar detected the second wave. 128 aircraft launched from Junyo, Hyo, and Ryuho at 0900 hours. This formation included 53 Judy dive bombers, 27 Zero fighters, and 48 torpedo bombers. Lieutenant Commander Kazuo Takahashi led the strike, a veteran survivor of 18 combat missions, including Coral Sea and Eastern Solomons. Fighter direction vectored fresh cap fighters to intercept 60 miles from the task force. The Hellcats held altitude advantage, 28,000 feet versus the Japanese at 19,000 feet. In aerial combat, altitude translated directly to tactical superiority, potential energy that could be converted to speed and position at will. Lieutenant Alexander Vracu's division scrambled to meet this second wave, but his Hellcats suffered mechanical failure on launch. The supercharger stuck in low blower, limiting his speed to 300 miles per hour and halving his normal climb rate. By the time he reached altitude, his squadron mates had pulled ahead into the engagement. Vracu spotted the Japanese formation below, at least 50 aircraft, Judy dive bombers in perfect formation, looking impossibly vulnerable. Despite his mechanical disadvantage, he executed a diving attack from directly overhead. His first target exploded immediately, the Judy's bomb load detonating in a massive fireball. He pulled up, rolled inverted, dove again. The second bomber's tail separated from its fuselage as 50 caliber rounds sawed through aluminum structure. The third kill came as Vracu climbed back for altitude. A Judy crossed in front of him, and he fired a short burst that ignited its fuel tanks. The fourth victim never saw him, attacked from the blind spot below and behind until it exploded. For his fifth kill, Vracu chased a Judy attempting to escape at low altitude. Despite reduced speed, he closed to point-blank range and fired. The bomber cartwheeled into the ocean. The sixth and final kill proved most spectacular. As Vracu lined up, the Judy's bomb load detonated from burning fuel heat, creating a fireball he flew straight through. In 8 minutes, he had destroyed 6 dive bombers using only 360 rounds of ammunition. His ordnance crew later calculated he had fired less than 5 seconds total to achieve 6 kills. When Vracu landed aboard Lexington, he held up 6 fingers to the bridge where Admiral Mitzger watched. That photograph became one of the war's most iconic images, capturing the joy and deadly efficiency of American naval aviation at its absolute peak. The second wave lost 97 aircraft. Hellcat pilots claimed 70 kills. Ship anti-aircraft guns destroyed another 20. Only 31 Japanese aircraft survived to return to their carriers, most heavily damaged, trailing smoke, and barely airworthy. By June 1944, the technological disparity between American and Japanese aviation had become insurmountable. The F-6F Hellcats development represented 3 years of combat experience distilled into mechanical superiority. The Pratt & Whitney Double Wasp produced 2,000 horsepower standard, 2,200 with water injection. This power drove a 3-bladed Hamilton constant-speed propeller optimized for performance at any altitude. Maximum speed at 23,000 feet, 380 miles per hour, rate of climb exceeded 3,000 feet per minute. Service ceiling reached 37,300 feet. Defensive systems included 212 pounds of armor protecting pilot, oil cooler, and oil tank. The windscreen consisted of 1.5-inch bulletproof glass capable of stopping 20mm cannon rounds. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented the catastrophic fires that plagued Japanese aircraft. Total fuel capacity, 250 gallons internal, with provision for a 150-gallon drop tank extending range to 1,530 miles.
The fire control system represented American mass production at its finest. 6 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, each firing 850 rounds per minute with 400 rounds per gun. Total ammunition, 2,400 rounds. The guns harmonized to converge at 300 yards, creating a concentrated kill zone where brief bursts could destroy any aircraft. Comparative analysis revealed stark disparity. The Mitsubishi A6M0 weighed 6,025 pounds loaded, half the weight of the Hellcat. Maximum speed, 351 miles per hour, 30 miles slower than the F6F. Most critically, the Zero carried no armor protection and no self-sealing fuel tanks. Its two 20mm cannon held only 60 rounds each, and the two 7.7mm machine guns proved ineffective against American armor. The Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber, among Japan's newest aircraft, could reach 339 miles per hour but remained catastrophically vulnerable. Without armor or self-sealing tanks, a single incendiary bullet could ignite its entire fuel system. The Nakajima B-6N JIL torpedo bomber suffered similar vulnerabilities while being slower and less maneuverable. Japanese pilot training had collapsed under attrition's crushing weight. Pre-war pilots received 700 hours of flight instruction before joining operational units. By 1944, replacements averaged 200 hours, with some receiving as few as 100 before combat deployment. Navigation training was minimal, instrument flying almost non-existent, formation flying rudimentary at best. American pilot training had become an industrial process of systematic excellence. Naval aviators received 600 hours minimum before carrier qualification. Instrument flying, navigation, gunnery, carrier operations, formation tactics, every aspect refined through methodical instruction. Training bases in Florida, Texas, and California produced 10,000 naval aviators annually, a conveyor belt of competence that Japan could never match. At 1,000 hours, Ozawa launched his third strike, 47 aircraft from Zuikaku, Chiyoda, and Chitose. By now, Japanese flight leaders knew the previous waves had encountered murderous opposition, but orders remained orders. Lieutenant Yoshio Fukui led 15 Zero fighters, having watched survivors return with tales of swarming Hellcats and walls of anti-aircraft fire.
Radar detected the third wave at 1,300 hours, range 120 miles. Fighter direction had refined interception tactics based on morning engagements. Instead of meeting raids head-on, cap fighters would attack from multiple directions simultaneously, preventing mutual support among Japanese formations. Commander William Dean from Hornet led 20 Hellcats in a high-side attack from the sun. The Japanese fighters, flying protective weave above their bombers, never saw the Americans until tracers connected. Dean's first pass destroyed 3 Zeros in 15 seconds. His wingman killed 2 more in the same diving attack. With escort fighters eliminated, Hellcats fell on the bombers with ruthless efficiency. Lieutenant James Shirley from Bunker Hill described it with grim simplicity. They just sat there in formation while we shot them to pieces. No evasive action, no defensive tactics. They flew straight and level while we made pass after pass. Ensign Wilbur Spider Webb, flying his first combat mission from Hornet, encountered scattered remnants of the third wave. In his after-action report, he wrote, "I couldn't believe they just flew straight and level while I shot them down. After the third one exploded, I started feeling sorry for them. Then I remembered Pearl Harbor and kept shooting." Webb destroyed 6 aircraft in this single engagement, becoming an ace on his first combat mission. 40 aircraft in the third wave, 7 survived to return to their carriers. Not a single Japanese aircraft reached attack position against American ships. The fourth and final wave launched at 11:30, 82 aircraft from Japanese Carrier Division 3, 30 fighters, 36 dive bombers, 16 torpedo bombers. This strike included many remaining experienced pilots held in reserve for the decisive blow. But the formation became disorganized almost immediately. Navigational errors sent half toward Guam instead of Task Force 58. Those who found the American fleet encountered walls of fighters stacked from 10,000 to 30,000 feet. The Americans had perfected their defense with fresh fighters constantly rotating through the combat zone. Lieutenant Commander Roger Mayle from Fighting Squadron 2 intercepted the fourth wave 40 miles from the carriers. His division of 4 Hellcats attacked 30 Japanese aircraft. In 12 minutes of combat, they destroyed 17 enemy planes without loss. Mel personally accounted for 5, methodically picking off aircraft from the formation's rear forward. The slaughter continued as successive Hellcat waves rotated through the battle area. Fresh fighters with full ammunition replaced those running low. Damaged Hellcats returned to carriers while mechanics and ordnance crews prepared aircraft for immediate turnaround. The American carriers had become continuous conveyor belts of destruction, launching fighters, recovering them, rearming, refueling, launching again. Commander David McCampbell demonstrated tactical brilliance throughout the engagement. During morning battles, he shot down 5 Judy dive bombers in his first sortie. After refueling and rearming, he launched again in the afternoon and destroyed 2 more Zeros over Guam, bringing his day's total to 7 victories. His leadership and positioning squadrons for maximum efficiency while managing fuel and ammunition reserves proved crucial to the defense's success. By 1430, the Fourth Wave had ceased to exist as a cohesive force. Scattered survivors fled individually toward their carriers or diverted to Guam. American Combat Air Patrol followed them, destroying stragglers across a 100-mile swath of ocean. While Hellcats dominated the aerial battle, American submarines delivered crushing underwater attacks against Ozawa's carriers. USS Albacore, commanded by Lieutenant Commander James Blanchard, had been trailing the Japanese fleet since dawn. At 9:05, Blanchard fired 6 torpedoes at carrier Taiho, Ozawa's flagship. 1 torpedo struck the carrier's aviation fuel tanks. The damage seemed manageable initially. Damage control teams began repairs, but volatile fuel vapors spread throughout the ship, seeping through ventilation systems and accumulating in closed spaces. At 1432, a massive explosion tore Taiho apart from within. The newest and largest carrier in the Japanese fleet, commissioned just 3 months earlier, sank with 1,650 crew members. USS Kavala, on her maiden war patrol under Lieutenant Commander Herman Kostler, detected carrier Shokaku at 1100 hours. Kostler fired 6 torpedoes, scoring 3 hits. Aviation fuel erupted through the hangar deck. Bomb magazines detonated in sympathetic explosions. Shokaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, and Santa Cruz, sank at 1500 hours with 1,272 men. In 4 hours, submarines had eliminated 2 fleet carriers totaling 60,000 tons. Combined with the aerial massacre, the Japanese Navy had suffered catastrophic and irreversible losses. By sunset on June 19, 1944, the arithmetic of destruction was staggering. Japanese losses: 346 carrier aircraft destroyed, approximately 50 land-based aircraft from Guam and Rota eliminated, 2 fleet carriers sunk. More critically, 400 pilots and aircrew killed, including most remaining experienced aviators. The institutional knowledge, the combat wisdom accumulated through 3 years of war, was gone forever. American losses: 29 aircraft in aerial combat and operational accidents. Most pilots were recovered. Total American casualties: 109 dead from all causes, including anti-aircraft accidents and operational losses. The kill ratio exceeded 15-to-1 in favor of American fighters. Individual pilots achieved remarkable scores. Lieutenant Alexander Varasu, 6 kills. Commander David McCampbell, 7 kills. Lieutenant William Dean, 5 kills. Ensign Wilbur Spiderweb, 6 kills in his first combat mission. The human dimension behind these statistics was profound. Young American pilots, many in their early 20s, had systematically destroyed an entire generation of Japanese naval aviators. Lieutenant Junior Grade Charles Stimson from WASP later reflected with disturbing honesty. It wasn't really combat, it was execution. They came at us in waves, and we shot them down in waves. I felt like I was at a target range. Japanese pilot Saburo Sakai, observing from Iwo Jima, later wrote, "June 19, 1944 was the death of Japanese naval aviation. Our carefully rebuilt air groups, 2 years in training, were destroyed in a single day. The Americans had turned the sky into a slaughterhouse. Those who survived spoke of Hellcats everywhere, above, below, behind. There was no escape." June 20th brought the final act of this tragedy. American search planes located Ozawa's retreating fleet 275 miles west of Task Force 58. Admiral Mitsuer faced a critical decision: launch a strike at extreme range, knowing his pilots would return after dark, or let the Japanese escape. At 1630, Mitsuer gave the order that would become legend: launch everything. 216 American aircraft launched in fading light. 85 Hellcats, 77 dive bombers, 54 torpedo bombers. They found the Japanese fleet at sunset, attacking through desperate anti-aircraft fire. The strike sank carrier Hio and 2 fleet oilers, while damaging carriers Zukaku and Chiyoda, battleship Haruna and cruiser Maya. Japanese combat air patrol, reduced to less than 35 operational fighters, could offer minimal resistance. Another 65 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in this twilight battle. The return flight became an epic of navigation and survival. Pilots flew through darkness with fuel gauges touching empty. Many had never attempted night carrier landings. Radio discipline broke down as desperate pilots called for bearings to any American ship.
Admiral Mitsuer made perhaps his most famous decision: turn on the lights. Every ship in Task Force 58 illuminated, searchlights pointed vertically, running lights blazing, flight decks outlined in lights. The risk of submarine attack was accepted to save American air crews. Destroyers fired star shells to mark fleet position. Cruisers turned on searchlights as beacons. The ocean lit up like a city, guiding exhausted pilots home. Aircraft landed on any available deck. Fuel-starved planes ditched alongside destroyers. Damaged aircraft crash-landed on carriers, their crews pushing them overboard to clear decks for others still airborne. 80 aircraft were lost to fuel exhaustion or deck crashes, but aggressive rescue operations saved most crews. Destroyers assigned as plane guards recovered pilots, sometimes within minutes of ditching. Only 49 airmen from the returning strike force were lost, a remarkable achievement given the circumstances. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, christened the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot by victorious American pilots, marked the end of Japanese carrier aviation as an effective force. In 2 days, Japan lost approximately 480 carrier and land-based aircraft, 3 fleet carriers, and 2 oilers. The pilot losses were catastrophic: over 445 aircrew killed, including most remaining veterans. Admiral Ozawa's Operation Ago had assumed rough parity in pilot skill and aircraft performance. Instead, Japanese pilots encountered American aviators with superior training, flying superior aircraft, supported by superior radar and fighter direction. The technological and training gap had become unbridgeable. The Marianas fell to American forces within weeks. B-29 superfortresses based on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam would soon bring the Japanese homeland under sustained strategic bombardment. The November 1944 raids from these bases marked the beginning of systematic destruction of Japanese cities and industry. Japanese naval aviation attempted one final operation at Leyte Gulf 4 months later, but could muster only 108 aircraft from 6 carriers. Most were shot down without achieving significant results. The carriers themselves were sacrificed as decoys, empty shells of their former power. After Leyte Gulf, Japanese carriers never again launched offensive operations. The Hellcats' dominance reflected American industrial capability and design philosophy. Grumman produced 12,275 F-6F Hellcats in just over 2 years, with peak production reaching 600 aircraft per month. Each aircraft required 20,000 man-hours to construct, yet assembly lines achieved remarkable efficiency through standardization and minimal design changes. The basic F-6F design remained essentially unchanged from 1943 to 1945. While Germany and Japan continuously modified their fighters, seeking marginal performance improvements, America focused on mass production of a proven design. This philosophy extended throughout American aircraft production. Quantity with adequate quality defeated quality without quantity. Radar technology provided the decisive edge in fighter direction. The SK Air Search Radar could detect aircraft at 100 miles, allowing 40 minutes warning of incoming raids. The SM Fighter Direction Radar provided precise bearing and altitude data for vectoring interceptors. Combat Information Centers integrated radar data with radio communications, creating real-time battle management systems decades ahead of their time. The proximity fuse, one of the war's most closely guarded secrets, revolutionized anti-aircraft defense. These shells detonated automatically when passing near aircraft, eliminating the need for precise altitude settings.
The resulting lethality forced Japanese aircraft to attack from higher altitudes, reducing their accuracy. American logistics sustained continuous operations at unprecedented tempo. Task Force 58 Service Squadron delivered 270,000 gallons of aviation fuel, 7,000 gallons of lubricating oil, and 45 tons of ammunition daily during the battle. Replacement aircraft were catapulted from escort carriers directly to fleet carriers during operations. Damaged aircraft were repaired overnight by maintenance crews working around the clock. While technology and training created conditions for victory, individual pilots executed the destruction. Their stories reveal the human dimension behind statistics. Lieutenant Junior Grade Milton Tootle from Bunker Hill achieved 5 kills despite having his hydraulic system shot out by a Japanese rear gunner. Unable to lower landing gear normally, he cranked them down manually while flying with his knees and then landed successfully on the carrier. His plane captain counted 47 holes in the Hellcats' fuselage and wings. Ensign Robert Duncan from Princeton was separated from his division during the second wave interception. Flying alone, he encountered 12 Japanese bombers without escort. In a running battle lasting 15 minutes, Duncan destroyed 4 bombers before running out of ammunition. He then used his aircraft to force another bomber to crash into the ocean, achieving 5 kills without firing his last shots. Lieutenant Commander George Duncan, no relation to Robert, from Montera, led a division that intercepted 40 Japanese aircraft. Outnumbered 10-1, Duncan's 4 Hellcats destroyed 19 enemy planes in 8 minutes. Duncan personally accounted for 6, using disciplined fire control to maximize ammunition. His wingman, Lieutenant Junior Grade John Strain, destroyed 5 more. The coordination between pilots demonstrated American tactical superiority. Divisions maintained mutual support while engaging multiple targets. Wingmen protected leaders during attacks. Damaged aircraft were escorted home by teammates. This disciplined teamwork contrasted sharply with the increasingly desperate individual efforts of Japanese pilots. For Japanese aviators, June 19th was apocalyptic. Pilot Officer Yoshiro Shiroma, one of 15 survivors from carrier Zukakaku's air group, later testified, "We knew we were flying to our deaths when we saw the wall of Hellcats waiting for us. The sky was filled with tracers. Planes exploded everywhere. I saw at least 20 of our aircraft destroyed in less than a minute." Lieutenant Commander Akira Tarui, leading torpedo bombers from Chiyoda, watched his entire squadron annihilated. The Americans attacked from above, below, and both sides simultaneously. We had no chance to maneuver or counterattack. My gunner was killed in the first pass. My controls were shot away in the second. I crashed into the sea and spent 6 hours in the water before a destroyer found me. The few experienced pilots understood their situation was hopeless. Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi, an ace with 12 victories, survived by immediately jettisoning his bombs and fleeing at wave-top height. He later wrote, "The young pilots followed their training and maintained formation while being slaughtered. Those of us who survived did so by abandoning all tactical doctrine and running for our lives." The psychological impact was devastating. Ensign Tao Miyazawa, who returned to Carrier Junya with his aircraft riddled with bullets, reported, "The Americans were everywhere. As soon as we engaged one group of Hellcats, another group attacked from a different direction. Our formations dissolved into chaos. Pilots were screaming on the radio. I saw at least 30 of our planes going down in flames simultaneously." Admiral Mark Mitzer's leadership proved decisive throughout the battle. His decision to launch everything available against incoming raids rather than maintaining reserves maximized defensive firepower when it mattered most. His controversial choice to illuminate the fleet for returning pilots demonstrated moral courage, risking submarine attack to save his air crews.
Mitzer's fighter direction officers coordinated the most complex aerial defense in naval history, managing over 450 fighters simultaneously. The system worked flawlessly, vectoring fighters to optimal intercept positions while managing fuel states and ammunition loads. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding 5th Fleet, faced criticism for not pursuing Osawa's fleet more aggressively. However, his primary mission was protecting the Saipan invasion force. His cautious approach prevented any possibility of a Japanese end run against vulnerable transports and supply ships. The 50,000 troops ashore on Saipan depended on continuous supply from the invasion fleet. Admiral Osawa, despite catastrophic losses, conducted a skilled withdrawal under terrible conditions. His decision to transfer his flag from the sinking Taiho to cruiser Haguro, then to carrier Zuiko-ku, maintained command continuity. His after-action report honestly assessed the disaster. The enemy's fighter direction and pilot quality exceeded all estimates. Our aircrew training was inadequate for this level of combat. Behind the fighter pilots, thousands of sailors sustained the aerial defense. Plane handlers moved aircraft on crowded flight decks with choreographed precision. Ordnance crews loaded millions of rounds of ammunition. Mechanics repaired battle damage between sorties. Landing signal officers guided damaged aircraft aboard despite hydraulic failures, wounded pilots, and fuel exhaustion. Aviation machinist mate First Class Roberto Martinez from Lexington recalled, "We turned around aircraft in 12 minutes. Refuel, rearm, check the engine, patch bullet holes with fabric and dope, and launch again. We worked 20 hours straight during the battle. Nobody complained. We knew our pilots were counting on us." The ammunition expenditure was staggering. Task Force 58 fired over 2.4 million rounds of 50 caliber ammunition on June 19th alone. Ordnance crews loaded 15,000 rounds per hour at peak tempo. Belt after belt of ammunition moved from magazines to aircraft, a continuous flow that never stopped during daylight hours. The medical response saved numerous lives. Flight surgeons treated wounded pilots between missions, allowing many to return to combat. Pharmacist's mate Second Class James Thompson from Enterprise performed emergency surgery on a pilot whose foot was nearly severed by cannon fire. The pilot flew again 3 weeks later with a prosthetic attachment on his rudder pedal. Rescue operations achieved remarkable success. Destroyers assigned as plane guards recovered pilots sometimes within minutes of ditching. Submarines on lifeguard stations saved aviators hundreds of miles from the task force. OS-2U Kingfisher float planes launched from battleships and cruisers rescued pilots from inside Japanese-controlled waters. American codebreakers had provided strategic warning of Japanese intentions weeks before the battle. Decoded Japanese naval messages revealed Osawa's basic plan, order of battle, and approximate timing. This intelligence allowed Spruance to position his forces optimally and prepare for expected attack patterns. The capture of the Z-Plan documents from Admiral Koga's crashed aircraft in March 1944 had given American planners detailed insight into Japanese strategic thinking. Every aspect of Operation Ago was anticipated and countered before the first aircraft launched. Radio intelligence units aboard carriers intercepted and translated Japanese tactical communications in real time. Lieutenant Charles Sims, a Japanese language specialist aboard Lexington, monitored enemy pilot conversations throughout the battle. His translations provided immediate tactical intelligence on Japanese formations, targets, and damage assessments. One intercepted transmission revealed the depth of Japanese despair. A squadron leader called out, "This is impossible. They know where we are before we see them. It's not fighting, it's murder." Sims translated this in real time, boosting American morale while confirming the effectiveness of fighter direction. The intelligence advantage extended to technical knowledge. Captured Zero fighters had been thoroughly analyzed, revealing every strength and weakness. American pilots knew exact turning radii, climb rates, and vulnerable points. Training programs incorporated this knowledge, teaching pilots precisely how to fight Japanese aircraft. The Marianas Turkey Shoot fundamentally altered the Pacific War's trajectory. Japanese carriers would never again launch significant offensive operations. The Imperial Navy's carefully rebuilt air groups, 2 years in training, had been eliminated in 8 hours of combat. Production statistics illustrated Japan's impossible position. American factories produced 36,000 combat aircraft in 1944. Japan manufactured 13,000, most of inferior quality using substitute materials due to resource shortages. American pilot training programs graduated 65,000 aviators in 1944. Japan trained fewer than 5,000, most with minimal flight hours. The technological gap continued widening. America introduced improved fighters like the F-4U-4 Corsair and F-8F Bearcat. Radar systems improved monthly. Proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells made attacking American ships virtually suicidal. Japan had no response except the desperate kamikaze tactics adopted 3 months later at Leyte Gulf. Strategic bombing from the captured Marianas began in November 1944. B-29s flying from Saipan and Tinian systematically destroyed Japanese cities and industry. The March 1945 firebombing of Tokyo killed more people than either atomic bomb. The atomic bombs that ended the war flew from Tinian's North Field, built on an island captured because Japanese naval aviation could not stop the American invasion. The battle validated multiple doctrines. Training quality proved more important than individual courage. American pilots with 600 hours of training consistently defeated Japanese pilots with 200 hours, regardless of determination or fighting spirit. Systematic instruction in gunnery, tactics, and instrument flying created competence that enthusiasm could not match. Aircraft design philosophy was vindicated completely. The Hellcats' emphasis on pilot protection, firepower, and structural strength proved correct. The Zero's design philosophy, sacrificing everything for maneuverability, had become obsolete. Modern air combat rewarded survivability and firepower over agility. Fighter direction emerged as the crucial multiplier. Centralized control maximized defensive efficiency while minimizing losses. Radar-guided interception allowed defenders to always achieve favorable positioning. The Japanese, lacking comparable systems, flew blind into prepared killing zones, slaughtered with industrial efficiency. Logistics determined sustainability. American ability to maintain continuous operations, rapidly repair damage, and replace losses created cumulative advantages. Japanese inability to replace losses meant each battle further degraded their capabilities. Attrition warfare favored the side with superior industrial capacity, and America's factories had become arsenals of democracy that Japan could never hope to match. Veterans of the turkey shoot carried their experiences throughout their lives. Alexander Verechu became a test pilot evaluating jets that would define the next generation of naval aviation. He flew the Grumman F-8F Bearcat, the Hellcats' successor, and later tested early jet fighters. Verechu retired as a commander in 1963, having survived being shot down over the Philippines and spending 6 weeks with Filipino guerrillas evading Japanese patrols through jungle and village.
David McCampbell continued his career, eventually commanding carrier air groups and serving as captain of carriers Bonhomme Richard and Shangri-La. He retired as a captain in 1964, the Navy's all-time leading ace with 34 victories. McCampbell received the Medal of Honor for his actions on June 19th and October 24th, 1944, the only carrier-based pilot to receive the nation's highest decoration during World War II. Many pilots became airline captains, flying the same Pacific routes they had fought to secure. The transition from military to civilian aviation was natural for men trained to fly long distances over water. Their combat experience made them exceptionally capable pilots who could handle any emergency with calm precision born of surviving aerial combat. Japanese survivors faced different futures. Some became Buddhist monks, seeking spiritual reconciliation with their wartime experiences, finding peace in meditation and contemplation. Others worked in Japan's post-war aviation industry, applying hard-learned lessons to civilian aircraft design. A few wrote memoirs, preserving the perspective of the defeated, ensuring their comrades' sacrifices would not be forgotten. The psychological impact lasted decades. American pilots spoke of recurring dreams where Japanese aircraft kept coming in endless waves, night after night for years. Japanese survivors described nightmares of Hellcats attacking from every direction, inescapable predators in a sky turned hostile. Both sides carried invisible wounds that time never fully healed, memories that surfaced unexpectedly decades later. Reunions brought former enemies together in later years. At a 1984 gathering commemorating the battle's 40th anniversary, Alexander Vreshu met Sadamu Komachi, one of the few Japanese survivors from June 19th. Through an interpreter, Komachi told Vreshu with quiet dignity, "You were doing your duty, as was I. I'm glad we both survived to become friends." They corresponded until Komachi's death in 2001, letters bridging the chasm war had created. The battle's legacy endures in multiple forms. Aircraft museums display restored Hellcats and Zeros, allowing visitors to appreciate the physical reality behind statistics. The National Museum of Naval Aviation's F-6F-3 is Vreshu's actual aircraft, complete with 19 victory flags representing his total score. Visitors can touch the cockpit where he sat, see the gun ports from which death emerged. The USS Yorktown, now a museum ship in Charleston, South Carolina, includes comprehensive exhibits on the turkey shoot. Visitors can stand in the Combat Information Center, where fighter directors vectored Hellcats to their intercepts. The radar scopes, plotting boards, and communication equipment remain as they were in 1944, frozen in time, silent witnesses to the battle's choreographed violence. Maritime archaeologists have located several ships sunk during the battle. Shokaku rests at 12,000 feet, her flight deck still bearing aircraft ready for launch that never occurred, frozen in their final moment. Taiho lies even deeper, her massive hull broken by the explosion that sent her down, torn apart from within by volatile fuel vapors. These war graves are protected sites in the Philippine Sea, underwater monuments to those who never came home. Historical analysis continues evolving. Newly discovered Japanese documents revealed previously unknown details about pilot training, aircraft production, and command decisions. American records, gradually declassified, show the full extent of intelligence advantages and technological superiority that made victory inevitable. Veterans' oral histories provide irreplaceable perspectives. The Veterans History Project has recorded hundreds of interviews with turkey shoot participants. These first-hand accounts preserve details that official records miss. The smell of aviation fuel mixed with cordite, the sound of Hellcat engines at full throttle, the sight of burning aircraft falling like meteors, the taste of fear and adrenaline. Educational programs ensure the battle's lessons reach new generations. The Naval Aviation Museum's flight simulators allow visitors to experience aerial combat from a Hellcat cockpit, though no simulation can truly capture the terror and exhilaration. Documentary films combine veteran interviews with computer-generated recreations of the battle, preserving memories before they fade forever. The turkey shoot accelerated military aviation development. The battle proved that radar-directed fighters could create an impenetrable defense against conventional attack. This lesson influenced strategic planning during the Cold War, leading to sophisticated integrated air defense systems like SAGE and NORAD, direct descendants of the fighter direction techniques pioneered in the Pacific Sea. The proximity-fused technology pioneered in 1944 evolved into modern smart weapons. The principle of detonating munitions near targets without requiring direct hits underlies everything from surface-to-air missiles to contemporary air defense systems, a technological lineage stretching directly from that June day. Fighter direction techniques developed for the turkey shoot became the foundation for modern air traffic control. The same principles of radar tracking, vectoring, and centralized control that destroyed Japanese air power now safely guide millions of civilian flights annually, peacetime applications of wartime innovations. The emphasis on pilot survivability seen in the Hellcat influenced all subsequent American military aircraft design. Every modern American fighter incorporates extensive armor, redundant systems, and escape mechanisms that trace their heritage to lessons learned in the Pacific. The philosophy remains unchanged. Bring the pilot home alive. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot represented more than tactical victory. It demonstrated that modern warfare had become a contest of systems rather than individual courage or martial spirit. Superior technology, training, logistics, and intelligence created conditions where bravery alone could not prevail. The age of the warrior had given way to the age of the system. Admiral Mitcher's after-action report simply stated, "The enemy's carrier aviation has been destroyed." That destruction came through convergence of American industrial might, technological innovation, and human skill operating as an integrated whole.
12 hours of combat on June 19, 1944 eliminated Japanese naval aviation as an offensive force, a military capability annihilated so completely it could never be rebuilt. In the depths of the Philippine Sea, 3 Japanese carriers rest on the ocean floor, their aircraft still in hangars that could never again launch strikes, crews entombed in steel coffins. But the true destruction occurred in the sky, where over 400 Japanese aircraft and their irreplaceable crews met their end against American Hellcats, falling like autumn leaves stripped by a terrible wind. The disparity was final and irreversible. Japan began June 19th with hopes of a decisive victory that might stall the American advance, perhaps create conditions for negotiated peace. They ended it with their carrier aviation effectively eliminated, their strategic position hopeless, and their homeland exposed to the strategic bombing that would culminate in atomic destruction 14 months later. The Turkey Shoot was not just a battle. It was the moment when technological superiority, training excellence, and industrial capacity converged to create an insurmountable advantage. The age of the samurai aviator had ended, replaced by an era where systematic superiority determined outcomes regardless of individual valor.
Lieutenant Alexander Vrachu's 6 fingers held up to Admiral Mitcher became the battle's enduring image, a young pilot's triumph captured in a moment of pure joy. But behind that gesture lay the fuller truth, the complex reality of industrial warfare. American pilots flying American aircraft, supported by American technology and logistics, had achieved what no amount of Japanese courage could overcome. The Hellcat had lived up to its name, bringing hell from above to those who challenged American naval power. In 8 brutal hours, Grumman's sturdy fighter had transformed the Pacific War's trajectory. The plane that some called the aluminum tank had proven that survivability and firepower trumped agility and finesse every single time. June 19, 1944 marked the end of Japan as a carrier power and the beginning of American naval aviation's absolute dominance of Pacific skies. That dominance would continue through the war's end and establish the template for carrier aviation that endures to this day. The lessons learned in those desperate hours above the Philippine Sea, the importance of training, technology, and systematic superiority remain relevant in an age of stealth fighters and precision weapons. Modern carrier doctrines still reflect principles validated that day: fighter direction, layered defense, pilot survivability, overwhelming firepower. The Turkey Shoot stands as history's most one-sided aerial battle, a day when American naval aviation reached its zenith while Japanese carrier aviation met its destruction. In the span of a single tropical day, the Pacific War's outcome became inevitable. All that remained was the bloody path to Tokyo Bay. The empire of the rising sun had been eclipsed by the wings of democracy, and the path to Tokyo Bay lay open across the vast Pacific Ocean. What had begun at Pearl Harbor 3 years earlier in surprise and infamy ended here in the Philippine Sea with systematic destruction. Japanese Admiral Somao Toyota had declared before the battle, "The fate of the empire rests on this one battle." He was more correct than he knew. The fate was sealed not by a single decisive moment, but by the cumulative weight of American industrial power, technological innovation, and human excellence operating in perfect coordination. The young men who flew Hellcats that day, most barely old enough to vote, had accomplished what the mightiest battleships could not. They had rendered an entire enemy fleet powerless, not through sinking ships directly, but by destroying the aircraft that gave those ships purpose and striking power. Carriers without aircraft were merely expensive targets, floating steel waiting for the torpedo or bomb that would send them to the bottom. As the sun set on June 19, 1944, it set not just on another day of combat, but on Japanese hopes for victory in the Pacific. The carrier force they had spent 2 years rebuilding, training, preparing for this decisive moment was gone. The pilots who flew those aircraft, carefully nurtured and trained, were dead. The institutional knowledge, the combat wisdom, the fighting experience, all gone. American factories would build more Hellcats, Training bases would produce more pilots. Damaged carriers would be repaired. But Japan had reached the limit of what their industrial capacity could sustain. They had gambled everything on Operation A-Go and lost catastrophically. The Turkey Shoot proved that wars between industrialized nations are won not just on battlefields, but in factories, in training schools, in research laboratories. The nation that can produce more weapons, train more warriors, innovate more rapidly, and sustain longer operations will ultimately prevail regardless of individual courage or tactical brilliance. For the young American pilots who survived June 19th, the memory would remain vivid for the rest of their lives. They had witnessed and participated in something unprecedented, the complete destruction of an enemy's aerial combat capability in a single day. They had seen the sky filled with burning aircraft, heard the desperate radio calls of doomed Japanese pilots, witnessed an empire's military power broken beyond repair. Some would feel pride in their achievement. Others would struggle with the memory of such one-sided slaughter. Most would feel both, understanding they had done their duty while recognizing the human cost on both sides. War had forced them to become killers, but peace would allow them to become men who remembered. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot remains unique in military history, a battle where one side achieved such complete dominance that the outcome was never in doubt after the first hour. It stands as testament to what happens when systematic excellence confronts desperate courage, when industrial power meets martial spirit, when the future collides with the past. In the silent depths of the Philippine Sea, the wreckage of that collision rests still. Ships and aircraft, American and Japanese, scattered across the ocean floor. Monuments to ambition and sacrifice, to courage and loss, to the terrible price of war and the inexorable logic of industrial conflict. The men who fought that day, on both sides, did so believing in their cause. History would judge their nation's aims differently, but the individual courage displayed cannot be diminished. Japanese pilots who flew towards certain death rather than abandon their duty. American pilots who flew into the unknown, facing skilled enemies with determination. All were warriors, all were human, all were caught in the machinery of total war. The Turkey Shoot marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The age of the battleship had already passed at Pearl Harbor. Now, the age of carrier aviation, as Japan had conceived it, emphasizing individual skill and fighting spirit over systematic excellence, had ended as well. The future belonged to integrated systems, radar, fighters, training, logistics, intelligence, all working together as a unified whole. This was America's genius, not in producing individual heroes, though it produced many, but in creating systems that allowed ordinary men to achieve extraordinary results. The Hellcat pilot with 600 hours of training, guided by radar, armed with reliable weapons, supported by efficient logistics, was more deadly than any samurai aviator flying alone. As darkness fell over the Philippine Sea on June 19, 1944, both fleets nursed their wounds and counted their losses. But only one side had a future. Japan would fight on for 14 more months, would inflict terrible casualties with kamikaze attacks and desperate defenses, but would never again threaten American naval supremacy. The carriers that survived would mostly sit idle, lacking aircraft and pilots to make them effective. The path to Iwo Jima, to Okinawa, to the Japanese home islands lay open. B-29s would soon rain fire on Japanese cities from bases in the Marianas. The atomic bombs would fall from Tinian, captured because Japanese air power could not stop the American invasion. All of this became inevitable on June 19, 1944. The Turkey Shoot was not the war's last battle, but it was the decisive one in the Pacific's naval campaign. Everything afterwards was epilogue, the slow, grinding advance of an outcome already determined. Japan had lost its ability to defend its empire's perimeter. Now it could only delay the inevitable, buying time with blood while hoping for some miracle that would never come. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, the name itself capturing both the one-sided nature of the combat and the grim humor of warriors who had seen too much death, stands as a monument to American military effectiveness at the apex of World War II. Never before or since has naval air power achieved such complete dominance in a single day's fighting. The legacy endures not just in museums and history books, but in the continuing evolution of carrier warfare, in the technology and tactics that trace their lineage to that June day, in the institutional memory of the United States Navy that still studies and learns from what happened in the Philippine Sea. The men who fought there are mostly gone now, passing into history like the battle they fought. But their achievement remains. They broke an empire's military power so completely that recovery proved impossible. They demonstrated that wars are won not by spirit alone, but by the combination of courage, skill, technology, and industrial might working in harmony. As the final Hellcats landed on their carriers that evening, as maintenance crews began repairing battle damage and ordnance crews reloaded weapons, as exhausted pilots slept the sleep of men who had cheated death for one more day, the future of the Pacific War had already been written. Japan's last realistic hope for a favorable outcome died in the skies over the Philippine Sea. What remained was only the terrible arithmetic of attrition, the slow advance toward inevitable defeat, the mounting casualties on both sides as a defeated empire refused to accept the obvious conclusion. The turkey shoot proved that industrial warfare rewards systematic excellence over individual brilliance, that wars between modern nations are won in factories as much as on battlefields, that technology and training can overcome courage and determination when the disparity becomes large enough. On June 19th, 1944, that disparity reached its ultimate expression. The result was military victory so complete that it passed into legend, a single day when the outcome of the war's Pacific theater became mathematically certain, when Japanese carrier aviation ceased to exist as an effective fighting force, when the last realistic obstacle to American advance across the Pacific was eliminated. The sun that rose on June 19th illuminated an uncertain battle. The sun that set that evening revealed an empire's death sentence, written in the contrails of falling aircraft and sealed with the blood of 400 Japanese pilots who would never return home. This was the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a battle that proved wars are won by nations, not just by warriors, and that the forge of American industry combined with the excellence of American training could produce a military instrument that no amount of courage or tradition could withstand. The lesson endures. In modern warfare, systematic superiority trumps individual heroism every time. The Hellcat pilots who flew that day were brave, skilled, and determined, but their victory came not from these qualities alone, but from the entire system that supported them, the factories that built their planes, the trainers who prepared them, the radar operators who guided them, the mechanics who maintained their aircraft, the entire industrial and military machine of a nation fully mobilized for war. Against such systematic excellence, Japanese courage proved insufficient. The samurai spirit that had served Japan so well in earlier conflicts could not overcome the massive disparity in training, technology, and industrial support. The result was inevitable, total, and final. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot stands as the ultimate expression of American military power in World War II. Not flashy or dramatic like D-Day's landings, not symbolic like the flag raising on Iwo Jima, but coldly effective, brutally efficient, and absolutely decisive. In 12 hours of combat, the United States Navy eliminated Japanese carrier aviation as a strategic factor, opening the path to total victory in the Pacific. That path would be long and bloody, but after June 19, 1944, its destination was never in doubt. The Turkey Shoot had sealed Japan's fate as surely as if the Emperor himself had signed surrender documents. Everything afterward was merely carrying out the sentence pronounced in the skies over the Philippine Sea.